Should Scotland be an independent country? 8 years ago, voters said no thanks, but now independence is back.
It is time to talk about making Scotland wealthier and fairer.
Why is it happening again? Why now? I'm James Cook. I've been reporting on Scotland for 30 years, since I was a teenager, and I'll be asking if this nation is set to leave the UK. To figure out what's going on now, we need to look at how we got here. Don't worry, this won't be a long history lesson, but let's just quickly spin back the clock. All the way back to 1707. That was when Scotland and England joined forces, forming a union, a partnership, which they named after the island they share with Wales, Great Britain. Gradually, this united kingdom grew even closer, trading together, building an empire together, fighting wars together. But for half a century now, the relationship has been under strain. In the 1960s, the US and the UK stationed nuclear weapons on the Clyde, less than 30 miles from Glasgow.
The campaign for nuclear disarmament supporters who attacked the ship by canoe.
They brought jobs, but also protests. In the 1970s, North Sea oil boomed. Energy firms made fortunes, and the British government raked in millions by taxing this black gold. But most of the oil was off Scottish shores, and its discovery fueled a nationalist movement which wanted all Scots to share in the spoils.
It's his oil. So why are there so few jobs for Scots?
The 80s were the decade of Margaret Thatcher, a Conservative Prime Minister supported by most English voters, rejected by most Scots.
Now, some people say that we're not a Scottish party, but neither are we an English party, nor a Welsh party, nor an Irish party. We're a party of the whole United Kingdom.
520,000 non-payers of the poll tax in Strathclyde alone!
When Mrs Thatcher brought in her controversial poll tax in Scotland, there was uproar. And she took on the trade unions.
We cannot allow the miners to be defeated.
The struggles were bitter, communities were divided. Old industries were forced to change or die.
In the past, certainly in the post-war era, there was a sense of solidarity, of having come through something existential together, of having even fought and died alongside one another. There was the creation or extension of many of the institutions that define the UK, like the NHS, the welfare system. There was more deference towards the royal family.
We had lots of collective enterprises, basically, in the UK at that time. And then I think Thatcher came to power, and that started to change. With deindustrialisation, all these industries and institutions that had brought us together started to crumble.
Where did all that turmoil take us? Well, to a really big moment. The Labour Party had tried, and failed, to give Scotland more control of its own affairs in the 1970s. Now, as the century came to an end, it tried again.
For all that and all that, it's coming yet. For all.
This time, the nation voted overwhelmingly to reopen the Parliament, which had closed more than 300 years before.
Shall brothers be for all that.
The Scottish Parliament adjourned on the 25th day of March in the year 1707 is hereby reconvened.
This wasn't independence, though. It was called devolution. The Parliament in Edinburgh would run schools, hospitals and so on. Westminster would keep control of the armed forces, borders and most taxes. The Labour Party hoped this would kill nationalism stone dead. In other words, end the talk of independence forever. That was wrong. Really, very wrong. Instead, support for independence remained steady and eventually began to rise. Why?
When Labour set the Parliament up, I think they thought this will be a nice little fiefdom, and we were in power in Westminster, and it was all fine, as you know, as long as that was the case. But as soon as that wasn't the case, as soon as a Tory government came back into power at Westminster, basically, it was going to be a problem.
There's maybe a sense of fatigue creeping in, maybe a sense of arrogance creeping into the Labour position, and Salmond spotted that, and his SNP were offering something new by that point. In a sense, they were offering a replacement, a like-for-like replacement for the Labour Party, that they were on the left, but they were more optimistic. If you speak to people who perhaps did support Labour in the 80s and 90s, a number of them will tell you that it was the Iraq War that was the straw that broke the camel's back, and you know, a significant part of the Scottish left at that point decided it was in favour of independence.
The Parliament took a lot of the sting out of being Scottish, and that was really good. But it set up a scenario where if there was a different government in Westminster, you know, a government of a different complexion from the government in Holyrood, there was going to be a clash.
The Scottish Parliament, based at Holyrood, at the foot of Edinburgh's Royal Mile, is not like Westminster. It has a different election system, which makes it hard for any one party to win outright control. It's designed to encourage cooperation. But in the 2011 election, the Scottish National Party basically broke that system. The SNP leader Alex Salmond campaigned to hold a referendum, a vote on leaving the UK. And in the election, his party won most of the seats at Holyrood.
I'll be speaking to the Prime Minister and laying down markers as to what this result, what this mandate means in terms of Scotland's relationship with the United Kingdom.
Even then, there was another hurdle to overcome before a vote could happen. The power to hold a referendum was one of those things which Edinburgh did not control. And hang on to that thought, because it'll come up again. Alex Salmond sought permission from the Prime Minister, David Cameron. He got it. The campaign began.
It's exhilarating. It's an exciting time to be alive, it really is. Vote no, you must vote no. Silent majority.
If you're fed up with the effing Tories, give them a kick and then maybe we'll think again. This is totally different to a general election. This is a decision about not the next 5 years, it's a decision about the next century.
How dare they say that this country is not capable of running its own affairs?
Your red coats and your 30 pieces of silver.
We have in our hands right now control of the future of our country, and tomorrow is our chance to keep it there.
This is not their flag, their country, their culture, their streets. This is everyone's flag, everyone's country, everyone's culture, and everyone's streets.
The vote itself happened in September 2014. 45% in favour of independence, 55% against. Alex Salmond resigned as First Minister. Nicola Sturgeon took over. So was that the end of the matter? No.
To make the case for the UK, you obviously had to make the economic case, but if all you were doing was making the economic case, it seemed to me you were storing up trouble for the future, because you had reduced it to that very narrow transactional arrangement, which is fine and important, very, very important. But obviously there's more to a country than economics.
Why did the Yes campaign lose?
I think they lost because people were afraid. You know, they were afraid of change, and they were afraid of things like losing their pension and financial uncertainty.
Much of the debate had been about money.
They control education, they control policing, control most of the tax levers that they need. What else do you want?
We get pocket money. We get pocket money from Westminster. We want control of our own income and expenditure.
Now look, any 8-year-old can tell you the flag of the country, the capital of a country and its currency. Now I presume the flag's the Saltire, I assume our capital will still be Edinburgh, but you can't tell us what currency we'll have.
We'll keep the pound because it belongs to Scotland as much as it belongs to England. It's our pound as well as your pound.
Officially, the campaign to keep Scotland in the UK was called Better Together, but one of its advisers nicknamed it Project Fear. Either way, it worked. The argument was that going it alone would be a disastrous leap in the dark, while sticking with England, Wales and Northern Ireland would mean safety, stability, prosperity. So how's that going?
It's an earthquake that has happened.
Independence Day!
Scotland faces the prospect of being taken out of the EU against our will.
Brexit means Brexit.
Stop Brexit, stop the good!
In the UK as a whole, 52% voted to leave the European Union, 48% to remain. But yet again there was division. In England and Wales, most voters were in favour of leaving. In Northern Ireland and Scotland, most were against. The UK left anyway. And that changed the landscape. But did it make independence more or less desirable? Which way would Scotland jump?
I am still very much in favour of independence.
Sally farms just a few miles from the border with England.
It really boils down to governance and my belief that the Scottish Parliament is the best place to govern Scotland. We have a fundamentally different economy. We are a different people, not in an exclusive that we're better than anybody. I just believe we are different and that we need our Scottish Parliament to have all the tools and levers to govern our country.
And how does Brexit play into that? Because some people would say that Brexit has made the economic case, the trade case, far trickier.
There are plenty of people who can say that. For me, independence is about being outward looking instead of inward nationalism. And Brexit has intensified my independence leaning simply because I want to rejoin the EU.
In Linlithgow, the birthplace of Mary Queen of Scots, national identity is loud and proud, even though this piper is actually an American on his holidays. But in the town's gin distillery, Ross, the boss, says there's more to independence than Braveheart bravado.
I'm a proud Scotsman. I think the idea of independence, if you stand there again, top of the hill with your kilt, having a wee dram, it's brilliant. It's fantastic. But the reality of it, especially now through the experience of Brexit, I honestly believe it would be a disaster for the country.
Your objection to independence is purely practical and purely based on economics.
Absolutely. Again, I think if you vote with your heart, I think, yes, a lot of Scots would vote positively or yes, but I think if you actually take into account reality and what it actually means to live in the modern world, then I don't believe we should be actually splitting things up. We should be coming together more.
But hang on, why are we even talking about this now? Didn't Scotland already say no thanks? Well, remember why that first referendum on independence was held? It was because voters elected a majority of politicians in the Scottish Parliament who promised to hold one. And remember what happened? David Cameron agreed to hand over the power so Scotland could vote.
That's lovely. Thank you very much.
Well, in 2021, it was déjà vu. Another election to the Scottish Parliament, another majority in favour of a referendum, this time made up of SNP and Green Party politicians. But the world had changed.
You must stay at home.
We may be starting to experience a potential tsunami of infections.
No more blah, blah, blah! No more blah, blah, blah!
Tonight at 10, prices are rising at the fastest rate for 40 years.
The Sougri report is rightly critical of unacceptable behaviour that happened in Downing Street and Whitehall during the lockdown.
I'm humbled by what has happened and I renew my wholehearted apology for the gathering in the Cabinet room on the 19th of June 2020, my birthday, for which I received a fixed penalty notice.
And what's the most important change since 2014 in terms of this debate about the Constitution?
Obviously, there's been Brexit, and I think that's made a huge difference. That makes a huge difference. And I think the other big thing that's changed is Scottish politics has completely decoupled from the rest of British politics.
Perhaps what's interesting, though, is that the support for independence hasn't increased more. You've had Brexit. You've also had Boris Johnson now, someone who in effect is hand-knitted to irritate Scottish voters. And yet the polls will show that we're still split relatively evenly on whether Scotland should be independent.
Do you think there's going to be a referendum? Do you think Scotland will be independent in the end? Where do you think we're heading?
I mean, ultimately, there will be another referendum, I think, whether it's going to be, on the timetable that's being set out just now. I'm not entirely sure, but I can't see the United Kingdom as it's currently constituted, carrying on for another 100 years.
My feeling is there won't be another referendum, and the major reason for that is nothing to do with the political parties, it's to do with the electorate. The polls have repeatedly shown that a majority doesn't want a referendum next year. Large numbers are much more interested in a referendum within the next 3 or 4 years. I think they just like the safety blanket of having that there, almost like break glass in an emergency to hold a referendum.
In any case, this time, Boris Johnson says he's no intention of handing over the power to hold another vote.
This is not the moment to be having another referendum. This is not the time. This is not the time for yet more delectable disputations about the Constitution when our European continent is being ravaged by the most vicious war since 1945 and when public services and the economy need to recover from the pandemic.
That refusal forced Scotland's First Minister Nicola Sturgeon to come up with another plan. Part 1 of that plan, publishing legislation in the Scottish Parliament for another vote.
The bill states that the question on the ballot paper should be, just as it was in 2014, should Scotland be an independent country? Presiding Officer, I can announce that the Scottish Government is proposing that the independence referendum be held on the 19th of October 2023.
Part 2 is asking the UK Supreme Court if that approach is legal.
We must establish legal fact. That is why, in my view, we must seek now to accelerate to the point when we have legal clarity, legal fact. And crucially, in doing so, I hope, establish and safeguard the ability of this Parliament to deliver a referendum on the date proposed.
If that fails, the fight could end up here, because Nicola Sturgeon says she would contest the next Westminster election on this issue alone, arguing that an SNP majority in Scotland should mean independence without a referendum. Downing Street's response remains the same. Now is not the time. There are other options for Scotland. After 2014, the Scottish Parliament's tax and benefits powers were expanded. Labour's considering whether to go even further. But it's still independence which dominates the discussion. The turmoil of the past few years has reshaped the debate about Scotland's future. It's thrown up thorny questions about borrowing, benefits and borders, tax and trade, nuclear weapons and energy. A supporter of independence might look at all that and see the case for leaving the UK. The British state is failing to meet these challenges, they say, and starting afresh is the answer. But an opponent of independence looks at the same facts and might see the case for the Union. An independent Scotland would struggle to cope, they would argue, and sticking together is safer. It all boils down to one simple question. Would Scotland be better off making its own decisions, or would it be dangerously exposed? With or without a referendum, that's a debate which will continue.